Okay, it looks like we're live. Hey friends, and welcome. If you're catching this as a replay, or if you're joining us live, I'm joined by Father Roderick, Death Star Chaplain, and I am the founder of Legend Fiction, our writing community. And what we're doing is opening it up. It's an AMA today. If you've got questions about anything, go ahead and say hi in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and put that in. AMA. Let's go with Ask Us Anything. I'm just typing it right now. Um, so we're going to kick it off and talk about superheroes and adventures, largely because we've got the new Superman movie coming up by James Gunn. Um, I've seen some of the trailers. It looks like a lot of fun. You made a comment that it might be a mile marker in terms of our culture, in terms of all of the sad, grimdark, depressing, sad heroes. And now we're leaning back into a desire for happier heroes or heroes who are, I don't know, where would you go with this? You were saying something interesting and I interrupted you.
No, I think it's I've had this feeling for a while now that James Gunn, since he is basically rebooting the DC universe, he needed to do something different, and he needs to distinguish himself from what came before. And we have just s- um seen for more than a decade all these grim, dark stories where every superhero basically needs therapy, and they're all like they're superheroes, but at the same time they're all losers. They're all really conflicted people. They have a lot of trauma that they haven't resolved. And to me, I mean, it's these stories are very well executed, but for me, they always lack something that I loved when I discovered Superman
Mhm.
in as a child. And Superman was the only superhero that I knew of
Oh,
because I
really?
live in the Netherlands and that was an American thing. So the only uh, comic book series that was actually marketable in the Netherlands was Superman. So
Oh,
I
wow.
bought with my weekly allocation, I bought these Superman comics every once in a while because they were expensive.
Okay.
And I just loved the fact that all those stories were so optimistic. Superman was just a very likable guy. And
Hmm.
the villains were always these super creative villains. They weren't actually very evil. They weren't like mustache twirling guys,
Hmm.
but they always had like these crazy plans to destroy the world, or they had these big machines, or it was all very visual, and there was no villain that was the same as the other ones, and it was much more about the kind of the plan that they had and how that unfolded and the mystery. There was a lot of mystery in those stories, like what is really going on. And then Superman was both a superhero, but also a bit of a detective. He had to figure out what was really
It's true.
going on.
Yeah.
And there was this sense of discovery. And it like, there was every issue was for me like a total surprise.
Hmm.
And then after a while, we get this whole period of, and I think it started with Batman, with the more gritty stories. And it was a lot of kind of societal criticism, cultural criticism. And then, especially with Schneider and everything, it became all about the superheroes not actually being so super. They might have superpowers, but they were more flawed than most humans. And I never really connected with that because I've when I was a child, I read Superman because I wanted to be Superman. I was dreaming of being the hero of my life, instead of being my bullies were the villains. And so um, those stories where the superheroes become actually people that you kind of pity is for me the opposite of what superhero stories should do. And I think that the change is coming because our world is changing so much. It's very dark in the real world.
Yeah.
And fiction, and we've talked about this many times, fiction is kind of a form of escapism that we need because it
Yeah.
it shows us a world the way it could be. And it shows like when I watch superheroes, or especially Superman, I see someone that I want to emulate. Maybe not by flying and by being super strong, but definitely morally. And I think that our world craves superheroes like that. And I think James Gunn has feels that. and he wants Superman to be an optimistic movie. And uh, I think it was Harrison Ford who said that the other day in a video that was filmed on the set of what's that psychology series that he does on Apple TV Plus. He's got
Oh,
uh,
I don't know the name, but I've seen the
he
title.
he, he plays a psychiatrist
Yeah,
basically, and so there was this
getting
TikTok
smaller or
video.
something.
Sorry,
Getting smaller or shrinking smaller. I can't remember.
a shrink. It's a shrinking, or I think it's just
Shrinking.
shrink.
There you go. Yes.
Anyway, so there was this behind the scenes video where they allowed fans to come on the set and ask questions, and someone asked
Okay.
Harrison Ford about, why all these stories with your career, and he said, stories, fictional stories, are a form of therapy. It allows us to practice. No, he said, fiction is rehearsal because we can rehearse choices that we need to make in real life, but in a fictional story, we can try that out and see
Right.
if it works and get inspired. And I thought it was like such a nice summary of what, for me, the superhero stories do. It's like they show me that it's possible to defeat evil and to stand strong for what you believe in and protect the weak and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And maybe in real life, that's a bit scary, but those stories give me hope and encourage me to do that in
Yep.
real life as well.
Yeah. It's fun. I like you mentioned Superman being so inspirational in the early days. I grew up um, uh, walking over to the library in Australia, and there's a superhero down there that's not here in America, called the Phantom, and he's all purple and he has skull ring, and he's out in Bengal jungle. Oh gosh, I've forgotten how the jungle that he's in. Anyhow, loved that hero, and he's such an indication of um, what was a normal thing, I think, across almost all of the early heroes. Like it's so weird seeing Batman grinning and smiling with Robin, and with all of his side characters, and they invariably all have some sort of a dog, bat dog or super dog, in the old comics. But there was such a sense of joy in how do you say, almost like an effortless joy in how they sought to wield the power and the gift that they
Mhm.
had. And then you're right, something has now shifted, and we now the heroes as I think it's important to think of them as like the sort of cultural touch points or cultural icons, right? They're like big sort of stained glass, larger than life things that we look at, full of a lot of color, but they're used to communicate or say something about here's how we should act to the problems in the world. And to be called to step up to solve problems in the world and to be doing it in a state of depression is an awful position to be in. And I think you're right. I think we're tired of that. Largely because somebody who is struggling with that kind of like self-doubt and anxiety, you don't stay in the fight. At some point you quit and you leave and you pull a Thor and you're just drinking beer and bloating out as with a beer
Right,
belly.
right.
You
Or
know,
you disappear like Superman did. It was like, I'm out of here. I'm just
yeah, yeah,
the death of the superhero.
right. All right. I think we tried to kill superheroes, and I think it's actually kind of cool that I think there's a resurrecting that is also happening. I think Marvel is now trying to figure out what are we doing with these heroes? How dark can we take them? We've had a lot of fun with them. We've kind of slogged through a lot of storytelling.
Mhm.
I think that I think a lot of stories have gotten lost by being co-opted by trending agendas. Um, and then people just don't watch them. I don't think people are anyway. I know I'm not. I think a lot of
I have
people
a
are not
hard
watching a
time.
lot of
Like I tried it
superhero stuff.
when they appear on Disney Plus. I will watch them.
Yeah.
What's the one that I saw the other night? It wasn't very good. It's just they're all very similar. And what I loved about Guardians of the Galaxy, which was my favorite Marvel series so far, and it's James Gunn, right?
Yeah.
What I love there, it's a pretty gritty story, but there is so much humor. And I think that humor is a superpower because it helps you relativize. And when you see that you know Star Lord is able to crack jokes in the middle of a very dire situation where he might not survive, I find that inspirational. And I hope that Superman will also reintroduce humor in the DC universe. And maybe with
Yeah.
their super dog, right? in the trailer. There's this.
Well, that's what I've
I
seen.
love
I'm very
that.
interested to see where the movie goes. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully it delivers on this. There's a line that inspires me from her name is Sister Nancy Usselman. She wrote a book called Becoming Media Mystics, and I have a conversation with her on the Legend Fiction channel, and I refer to it a lot, where she talks about um, uh, it's important and appropriate to realize that the things that are trending, not all of them, but a lot of them, are indications of how the Holy Spirit is moving through the hearts of humanity. And so when there are certain stories, okay, they have like short-term interest and then they go. But when you get a story that really lands in the popular consciousness and then it endures, there's probably something of deep, unyielding truth in it. And the fact that we as a humanity almost, or like huge chunks of society decide that is true. I want that in my sense of identity. I want to create community around this for the long term. You build life around this thing. She goes, we need to practice a bit of a mystical discipline of like let's pop the hood on this a little bit and have a look inside what's happening in media to figure out what is God doing, and why are we so in love with specific things? Again, especially I think when they endure, and they last, over time. I think something with superheroes as a genre, there's a reason why it's taken off. It's not just because you can sell a ton of merch, but because there's a deep theme inside superheroes, which is, I think, if you have the ability and the power to step up and do something good in the world, should you? And if you should, then what do you do? And that I think is the underlying theme of all superhero stories. And like you said, it's like we need that escapism because our world tells us you can do nothing, you don't matter, all of this is ultimately meaningless, and we walk around through life accepting that, but deep down feeling it can't be truth. And so we have to escape out of this horrible gray concrete jungle prison back into a world where things have color and are real, and good effort is rewarded and good effort can bring about good things. I mean, if you were to dig down even below what I'm just saying right there, I'm defining the kingdom of heaven, which is the resolving of evil and is the bringing about of good, and it's the trying to save as many people as possible. And um,
There are definitely a lot of similarities between let's say, the biblical narrative and the Christian narrative of salvation, and then what these superheroes stand for. And I think what you described isn't that the same as reading the signs of times as well? Looking at the culture is a way to read the signs of the times and then realize what people are craving and what they need, and then maybe do something about that.
and so I liked what you said earlier, right before we hit record. You talked about a hopeful call to adventure and how this new Superman movie might be a high water marker. It might be the first step back into reclaiming this as something that we people need, we humans need, and as storytellers. So for this conversation, we want to encourage people, um, create more stories. We need a ton more stories. We need lots more of fun, hopeful adventures. And so I was making the comment before we hit record that as a kid, as a young boy, I remember absolutely loving these adventure stories for boys, right? Adventure stories for girls, and I would just read everything because there was this thing that's been this feeling that's been lost in a lot of our stories today, which is this kind of cavalier embrace of the adventure, where young people, particularly young people, but as you start to sort of get a little bit older, this sense that the world is a field of adventure and that your life is also an adventure to be lived, not just something to be endured, and certainly not something to be dispensed with and just eliminated. A lot of the way our culture works today, um, again, tries to convince you that it's not an adventure. There's nothing good that can ever come from it, and you just need to learn a whole bunch of checklists and then do what you're told for the rest of your life. And basically, here's a bunch of bread and circuses to keep you dull and not paying attention to anything. And it's like, yeah, I've seen that movie before. That ends in a good place, sure. As opposed to a lot of these hopeful heroes who know that, like Tolkien would say, outside the borders of what you think is reality, there's a whole lot of wonderful adventure and wild lands that are constantly pressing in. Um, And stories are a vital way to help every generation return to a bigger sense of reality and the fact that you can have hope. You can do things and get up and push back on the world and create an arc and do good and rescue people and
Well, and
defend yourself.
adventure stories have, I think, something very particular in common, and that is that they help you to step away from yourself.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I think this trend that we've seen for a decade, where it was either kind of dystopian future stuff like Hunger Games, like there were so many stories where it was very much a prophecy of what
If you're
we're
hot,
currently
you
seeing.
win, basically.
But it was
Yeah.
like this idea that, oh, everything is going to hell, and then it's all about strive and battle, and one class against the other. Uh, and then we got that very dark, very self-centered period. Like for me, I can barely watch the Snyderverse because those superheroes are so much. It's all about them, and it's about their problems, um, now that the world is so threatening to a lot of people and so complicated and so uncertain,
Yeah.
what I see is there is on one hand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe this is a bit too black and white, but I see a tendency in fiction and in fantasy to make it all very small. It's like the cozy fantasy, cozy stories. So, like let's do a story about a bookstore and cats and tea, and because it
Okay.
feels safe, but it's also you're cocooning, and that's understandable. But it's also
Not the
it,
only response to what's going on.
yeah, I mean, it's almost like a reaction to a world that tears you apart. Let's make the world really, really small. But then you have this hopefully new resurgence of adventure stories where, yeah, the world is dangerous, but together we can go in that world with humor, with hope, with joy, and make a change. And I think it's very healthy to have adventure stories. I hope that the new Superman movie will do that and will take us
Yeah.
on an adventure, and
Yeah.
and that's why I hope that we will see something along the lines of what Indiana Jones did so well. I love stories like that,
Mhm.
and I think we'll have to wait a little bit until the movie industry gets there. What is so funny is that the games industry is already there. The
Yeah.
stories that are told now in video games are very much like adventure, exploration, go to faraway planets and rebuild society. And I love the current trend in video games where it's all about just the most amazing worlds that you can travel to.
Agreed.
Uh,
I want to ask you a bit more about that before everybody who has joined the live stream and is saying hi. It is good to see you. Thanks for joining us. It's an AMA. I forgot to put that in the title. But if you have any questions about, I mean, frankly, anything, but specifically maybe superheroes and adventure, maybe writing, stuff like that, please drop it in the comments and we will, I'll pose it to Father and share what I think. But it's an AMA. Drop any questions. You can make up a question. Doesn't even have to be real. Um, what's a game that you are thinking of when you're talking about these games that are really capturing very interesting things that you're seeing that's motivating you or that inspiring you? What's a game that maybe you've played or seen recently?
I love these Jedi video games, like in
I
the Star
agree.
Wars ones, where you follow
Yes.
this Cal Kestis, I think is his name,
Yes,
and
I've
he's
played both of those games. I love them.
and that is such a roller coaster adventure. Like sometimes I forget
Uh-huh.
that I'm in a game. It's like
Agreed.
I'm watching a movie, but I love the speed of it and the ups and downs, and this there's always a new. Every stage is a new adventure.
Mhm.
Um, And it's also a very likable guy, and the whole world is full of
Yeah.
interesting people.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one game that I just love. I never thought that we would see games like that, and it's so much more gratifying to me than, for instance, Battlefield, which is awesome, and you can walk around with stormtroopers and AT-ATs and whatnot. But that's just shooting other people, and there are so many games like that, and it doesn't have a sense of adventure, and it's whereas, like these kind of action adventure games, we had Uncharted, which was also kind of this Indiana Jones series
I've not
type
played
of
that one.
It
Okay.
was mostly on the PlayStation.
Okay.
Um, and it really has the feel of an Indiana Jones story. And by the way, the Indiana Jones video game is awesome.
The new one?
I mean
Okay.
that game blew me away. I have it on Game Pass. So I was playing it on the Xbox the other day. And the first part of the game takes place in the Vatican. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
you are brought, and it's so well done. It starts in the what is it? The Borgo San Michele,
Virgo,
the Bridge of Angels.
Puglini. Okay.
There's this big circular building where the Pope would retreat in times of war, and then you actually go over the Passetto, which is this it's still there. It's just like an escape route for the Pope, and then you enter Vatican City, and it is a recreation of Vatican City as it was around the Second World War. Um, but you can walk around the whole premises, and it is so. I mean, it is you're there. It's based on the architecture, and you have
Amazing.
this
Yeah.
fantastic adventure. And then, of course, you go all over the world, and it's just so much fun.
Yeah. I've not played actually any of them, but I've seen the trailers and listened to most all the soundtracks of the Assassin's Creed
Oh
storylines, and
yeah,
like
yeah.
how stunning the ancient Egyptian one was. The phenomenal sense of immersion. Um, this is something I keep coming back to in my mind, and we got a question actually from Lair, so I'm going to bring it up in a
Yes.
minute. Thanks, Lair. Um, uh, I was watching a playthrough of in-game cinematics for what was the game? It was God of War, Ragnarok,
Oh
I
yeah.
think.
So awesome. It's
And
going to be a movie.
well, yeah, so that was fun. But what struck me was through these games, a game it's like a novel, it's like a movie, except
Mhm.
you actually play through it. It's not as passive, and there's a sense in which you take a novel and then you um, bring it to life inside yourself and your imagination. But if you don't have a well practiced and exercised imagination, it won't come to life, or it won't really pull you in and immerse you. Movies are a little easier because they can like hit a bunch of other senses, pre-digest it for you, and then a game puts the two together. And we've never really done this before. And I was watching in the sense that it can fill a bunch of your senses, and it can help your imagination actually live through or play through the scene, come to the conclusions that will lead you through the story, and so on. And so I was watching that playthrough, and that game brought home to me the sense that what games now are able to do for us today is what adepts used to do in the mystery schools in the past, where their teacher would tell them something like, I need you to sit and cultivate silence and then practice, let's say, an Ignatian discipline of immersing yourself in this mystical moment in the past, of, let's say,
Mm.
the process to Calvary or the crucifixion or this time or this
Right,
life.
right, right.
And I need you to enter that moment and sit with it. And you're going to chew on that, and you're going to put reps into that meditation
Mhm.
until something is revealed to you, and you can make that your own, and it can form your spiritual development or something. Um, and that's why priests and religious practice liturgy of the hours and spiritual meditation is to chew on these moments and immerse yourself in them so that something can be revealed to you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Most people like me out in the world are not doing any form of intensive spiritual practice in a disciplined way. And when I saw these games and how gorgeous and immersive and thrilling these games are, and I'm realizing these are a way to transport us into learning deep things through a kind of um, experience that helps us to see and understand something. Um, I'm
It's a
still
bit like
struggling to
travel
articulate it.
also. It's your
Yes,
transport, and that, good books do that as well. But you just travel, and you're in different places, and you get to experience stuff that in your day-to-day life you just don't have time for, or
yeah,
just, life is just not as exciting as those worlds that you can visit. I mean, for
agreed.
me, the most impressive experience that I had recently was to play the Assassin's Creed game on the Quest 3, which is virtual reality.
Oh
And that
wow,
first
really?
part of that game is in Venice, and you're
Okay,
in a building, and it just I still sometimes dream about that experience because it feels you
I
see a table and you
Wow,
think it's there. It's very detailed,
amazing.
and the story is kind of you're just running around and try to get away with killing everyone. So it's not the most edifying story, but it was just I for, I was just happy to just walk around and listen to you. So there's this window, and you literally you look over the ledge, and then below you see the boats at
Oh,
night,
that's
and you see
amazing.
some musicians sing, and it's the 3D audio, and I'm just there. I don't have to go around killing people. I just want to be in that room and just enjoy Venice.
That's amazing.
What
Well,
was the question that we
I'm gonna
had?
bring up a question here, see what you think, and then so Lair says protagonists should have a shard of glass, which is a personal challenge to overcome in the story arc. Where is the cutoff between enough and then too much of personal issues? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a tricky balance. I mean, I think it's good to have those issues in as a backstory. It doesn't necessarily always have to be in the story itself, as long as there are hints at what is at stake. But for a good story, and I'm saying this as a total novice, you've written much more than I did. But what I've learned while writing my own story right now is that for a story to really hit home, you have to be able to identify with the personal journey of the characters. And if there's no personal journey, if there's no growth, if there's no resolution or healing, then it's just going to be a story, a sequence of events. And so yeah, I'm kind of struggling with one of my characters where she is a nun, a young nun.
Okay.
Um, and she is the total opposite of my protagonist, who is very like adventurous and but also as soon as he's confronted with authority, he ducks and he tries to play it safe. And she is like, no, but I just don't accept the authority. But the problem is she's a nun, and this has
Okay.
to do with her backstory, where she's coming from a family where she's been really
Also, this is the more the medieval world where you don't
yeah.
get an option. It's like you're put in a nunnery, and so that's your life
And you're a
path.
woman, so you
Yeah.
have no options, you know?
Yeah.
But she wants to, and so I'm trying to construct so how much it's going to it's a I want it to be a fun adventure. So I don't
Mhm.
wanna paint my initial idea was, "Oh, there has to be a story of abuse," and then, like, make it really heavy-handed. And I'm thinking, maybe I should just hint, but why would I have to tell that whole traumatic story in a flashback? Maybe it's not necessary. Maybe something happened and you just see the results. But what I'm interested in is how she gets from the beginning, where she's constantly revolting against all this like patriarchy and like a submission that is asked of women, and especially nuns. How is she going to grow into a strong woman like Saint Bridget, who becomes a leader?
Yeah.
And
Huh.
how is that going to work with all the other structures in the story? So anyway, but I love personal story arcs. If there's
Yep.
no evolution in Europe, we have this very famous comic book series, Tintin, and I think it's
I grew up
translated.
with that. I loved
Yeah,
that.
the thing is, Tintin is the most boring guy ever. He never changes.
Yeah.
He always has that he doesn't learn his. Oh, but what makes Tintin so amazing is that he is basically a gray mouse, but then all the other characters are fantastic and they evolve. And
Yes.
you have Captain Haddock, who is just constantly struggling with everything, and then and that is the characters make the story.
Right.
Tintin
That's true.
himself is kind of like, yeah,
Well,
he's the
he's
same guy.
Tintin is the stand-in for the reader
I
in
think
that
so.
he's the unchanging thing that allows you to observe everything and go on all the adventures. Um, and it's a specific kind of story where you want to um, experience multiple things, but it's not about your changing. It's about can you be a consistent person across multiple stories or across
Uh-huh.
multiple adventures? And so he is that kind of thing. It's like Indiana Jones, right? He
Right.
never changes across all the. I mean, he genuinely probably should with all of the things he comes up against, these spiritual realities, but he just stays agnostic to all of them because he's a stand-in for us,
Mhm.
going on these adventures. Well, here I'll give a shot at an answer here, and where was it? So where's the cutoff between enough and too much of personal issues? So I think it's a good question. Couple of things come to my mind. One is the kind of novel that you're writing and the kind of audience you're writing it for. That's an annoying answer to basically everything. So if you're writing for a very adult audience and you're Stephen King, you're going to spend a long time, the first 60% of your book, not making any change and getting into how awful everything is for your character and how they're struggling in all the wrong ways to solve their problems. And you're going to spend a lot of time with that because well, I think he does this really well. He builds a lot of rapport between you and the main character by showing how relatable they are. And with every problem that hits them, they respond the way you would respond. They don't respond in all the good ways. And so I haven't read enough of his books to know this exhaustively, but I have found this across a bunch of novels where I have really enjoyed them. There's this metaphor that is what is it called? It's like drawing the arrow. Like if you want your story to land in the bullseye, you then have to pull your character back away from the bullseye. So um, I think that it's helpful to think of the rule of three. So if a character has a problem, you don't want them to instantly have the solution. They need to try two bad options first, maybe even three bad options first, and then they finally understand the solution.
Or
And
getting better over the course of the challenges. So the first one, total failure because all the trauma, and then the second one, kind of works, but not there yet. And then the third time is really hits the mark.
Yeah, and I think an anti-hero kind of story is the person who keeps trying all the bad options and never gets to never accepts the right answer because they are resisting anything that it would take to accept the right answer that would sort of heal them. And so they keep doing all the bad options. And that's why anti-heroes are a form of cautionary tale. So to then maybe come back to Lair's question where she says, or he, or whoever you are, friend, what is the cutoff between enough and then too much? I think enough would be what is needed to help you tell the story and then earn the ending. There are some stories that are that you get into them and read them, and they don't stop with all of the problems and all of the rejections and the anger and the angst and all of this. And you could probably edit a ton of it out, and it wouldn't really affect the story. I think if we look at popular stories, they will go, here's a core problem the character has that is stopping them from resolving the story easily. Anytime that somebody has a skill that allows them to solve the problem or the story really easily, you don't really have a story because the story is all about the resistance. It's all about the like when you're trying to put energy through a piece of wire and then the wire is imperfect and so it heats up and it warps because it's not clean and perfect and so on. If you flip a switch and it goes straight through, maybe you have a short story. You don't have something that you can sit with and learn with, by following the character through the adventure. So the more relatable you create your character, I think the easiest way that I found to think about it is have them pick all the wrong responses that make total sense. Because to pick the right response would take a leap of experience that they haven't earned. And sometimes you have to get burnt out by your bad decisions to finally realize if I just put in the little bit of effort that's needed, I will have a better life. And then at that point, then the reader and the main character go, okay, I'm now exhausted by all of my own angst and resentment. I'm going to go finally make this choice. Or now it finally makes sense. Before, it did not make sense to make that choice. So if then you got like, well, he's got this trauma and his family did this and, this happened to his life and so on, I think just simply ask how much of that actually is supporting the actual story that you want to tell, because you could keep dumping in 50, 200 years worth of, ancestral stuff that's brought in. Okay, Lair, if this was helpful, go ahead and say hi in the comments.
One reaction to this.
Go.
An example of someone who actually used a lot of that trauma in a creative way was James Gunn. When he did Guardians of the Galaxy, we meet Rocket Raccoon. And in the first movie, he's just a funny sidekick. He's a talking raccoon.
That's
or
true.
He's not, but he resents everyone that calls him a raccoon. And then first movie, second movie, but only in the third movie we get to see his backstory. And then it becomes it hits so much harder because all of a sudden you discover these deeper layers of anxiety and suffering and pain, which makes him super relatable and super much more than just a sidekick. And then
Yeah.
when then the redemption comes, it is so rewarding because you already kind of love the character. And then you discover, oh, he's been carrying this invisible weight. And now that we know what happened, he needs to survive, and you root for him. And I
Yeah.
thought it was a masterful way of giving up. I mean, I was choked up watching that last movie, but it was because there was this trauma felt deserved. It felt, how do you say that? It was the appropriate time. If they had done that at the beginning, it wouldn't have worked because it wasn't the tone of the movie, and it was only in the third story that they could go that deep because you already care for all those characters. So I thought it was an interesting idea to just instead of starting with the trauma, putting it all the way at the end as a way to make your character more relatable and make people care for that character more.
Right. You create somebody like he's not only a unique and weird and different character in that he's a talking raccoon, but he's got a huge attitude and he's got a weird, twisted way of looking at the world. And
Yeah.
so it's an instantly relatable character. But then maybe you get a little bit of a problem if you keep staying that character forever.
Yeah.
He's incapable of well, maybe the comments or father prove me wrong. Talk me off this ledge here. When you create a really interesting, weird, offbeat, unusual character, it's very interesting at first, and you can maybe last a whole novel or a couple of movies with that character. But then a point comes where you begin to realize all of the ways that a person is acting. Heck, this is exactly how I live my life. Most of us probably do. The identity that we create serves us for a time, but then a point comes where it obstructs our ability to actually be in communion with other people, have a relationship
Mhm,
with other people.
mhm.
If you're constantly snarky and weird and offbeat, you might create a group of friends for a time period, but it's frankly a form of armor against the
Those
world.
are
It's a
coping mechanisms.
exact coping mechanism. And at some point, it's going to hold you back from partly why you're actually here and alive at all, is to enter into relationship with other people or with a situation or with reality itself. And if you're so armored up,
Mhm,
that can't happen. And a lot of stories are actually about that moment where the coping mechanisms all have to break.
mm.
And then the real person can then
Yeah,
emerge,
yeah.
who might still be really funny and still offbeat, but at this point, it's no longer a crutch. It now can come from, uh, like integrating, resolving the wound, healing of
Yeah,
the wound.
yeah.
The scar will still be there. Um, uh, we probably need to wrap up this conversation. I want to keep going.
There was one more comment here by Lear. Our co-writing with spouse protagonist is struggling with what is God's will for my life? How far should we take that? She could get depressed, but I think we want her to remain a likable, positive person. Uh,
That's an interesting, I mean, we all struggle with this, not just characters.
yeah.
I mean, so sometimes when we think we know what God's will is for our life, it might not actually be true. And we get depressed by it because it's so massive and inaccessible, or we recognize it's going to take a lot of sacrifice. And so we just never even start, and we get exhausted and depressed and we don't do it. So a question then might be, this is a very personal thing. I'm dealing with this a lot too. Maybe whatever that idea was is wrong, and it's not actually what God wants you for your life, because invariably God wants just a 1% conversion change. He wants a 1% change, 1% shift where you freely feel like you actually owned every single step. And then afterwards you find out, oh, he was supporting that whole process. Um, so it could be, as it is in real life, it can be for your stories, your characters too, that I have to become this massive thing. That's an ego driven temptation, could be a
Mhm.
dark temptation. Because if you reject that as an impossible thing and you never even start, well, then you failed at life. The enemy has won, that sort of thing. But the point is, it was the wrong game to be playing anyway, and that's not
Right.
usually how God operates with us.
And discouragement is always a sign that it's not God. Because if you feel discouraged, that's the devil wants to discourage us. And
Or
so,
it's your own ego recognizing, I don't have the capacity to do this at all. And then you have the question, do I do nothing, or do I think of a different something to do?
Mhm.
Most of us don't ever think of the different something. We just stay with the do nothing, and that's the problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because there's tension in that setup of the story. So that's always interesting when someone is struggling. But you don't want the story to be too depressing. So you could that upbeat side of a character. I mean, that's real life as well. We're not always constantly struggling with stuff. We also can be likable. So I like characters to be a bit complicated and sometimes maybe even contradictory. That makes a character even more believable, I think.
Well, you know what I think is also routinely true? A lot of the people that we meet around us who are excessively joyful and upbeat, they're masking the fact that there's an underlying depression or sadness or something. So if it can be hard, I think, to write a compelling depressed character unless it's like, I don't know, John Wick or the girl who kicked the hornet's nest, right? So they might be very depressed, but they overcompensate with all of these other things to drive the story. Um, Another way, if you can't do that, is have them mask that depression with something else, because a human person cannot live in a state of depression and doing nothing. You don't last that long doing that. So invariably, what we do is we mask it, or we create something else that allows us to compensate for that, to be fun and to be likable and to take action and to build the kind of life that we want. And we might end up doing it all wrong. And so a story might be, you're called to do this, and then you reject that and you go to create a life that you think you love. And then at
Mhm.
some point it collapses. And then you still have to make a decision about what's
Right.
actually a truth about your life.
That calling can still be in the background trying to get your attention, but then yeah, there are many ways in which you can uh kind of try to balance this. I think it has to be balanced because in our lives it is usually balanced, unless we're clinically depressed, but then there's no
Well,
story that's gonna help there. But I mean, you can build in these more contemplative moments in the story. It's not always action, but there can be just these moments where all of a sudden the character realizes, well, am I still on the right track? Am I, how I don't know, just have these moments of self doubt or in a conversation, have like someone else uh, to create a dialogue about this, and then just I would sit with the struggle because that makes the character more believable, more realistic. Because that's how we deal with stuff as well. It's not that we're either completely off track and then all of a sudden we're saints. No, we're constantly in the middle and we're trying. Okay, okay, I'm going off track. Okay, how can I get back on track? And so,
yeah.
yeah.
We often course correct, like a little too much. Like, if you ever played a game where you're trying to guide a ship, and we have to wrap this live stream now, but if you ever played those games where you're trying to fly a plane, right, or guide a ship, and then you tweak the controller a tiny bit, and all of a sudden it's like way off course, and like, no, back towards the center, and then it's like
Yeah.
canting wrong, and then it's the course correcting is almost impossible because you haven't literally mastered the environment you're in. You haven't mastered yourself. You haven't mastered the plane you're trying to fly or the ship you're navigating. And I think that's what we do with stories too. And I think it's important and okay that we field test with our characters the kinds of things that we might do in our own real life. But we
Yeah.
might field test those experiences with our characters. That's why we watch movies. It's like,
Right,
well,
right.
I would never go do this in politics, but I kind of think I might enjoy it. Let me go watch a movie about somebody who does that. And then you watch that movie, and by the end, they're an anti-hero and life is awful. And then you walk out and you're like, okay, I felt my way through that experience. I don't think I need to do that in actual real life. Let me go make a better decision. Right. So our characters might veer from side to side, and that missing of the mark, like St. Paul says, like sin is when you don't hit the mark and you go like 1 degree off, 10 degrees off to the side. And sometimes you course correct too much, but it's the process of the course correcting, even if you get it wrong, the
Mhm.
course correcting process is God at work in your life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And it's us at work in our characters' journey. We're trying to course correct them towards
Mhm.
a believable, interesting ending. So,
If you want to get some
Father, thank
biblical
you for
inspiration, go and read the story of Saint Peter again. talking about swinging back and forth and just completely abdicating and then
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
back again. That's a very
Or
nice
don't have to
example.
read anything. Think about yourself in the last 5 confessions you've been on, or if you're not
Right.
even Catholic or Christian, just think about your own life and you're trying to level up at being better and how you've made mistakes, then you went the other way and made other mistakes, and that was embarrassing, and you're trying to avoid the cringe and
Mhm.
it's we just apply that to our characters too. So hopefully this was helpful, friends. If it was, please say hi in the comments. We'd like to come back next week. Thank you, Father, for jumping on with me on the live stream.
Thank you.
We'd like to keep this going as an AMA series. Shout out to Lair for some pretty awesome questions. Hopefully that we were helpful today. And if you're catching the replay, say hi in the comments, and we'll bring up your questions on the next live stream. Thank you, Father. Have an awesome rest of your week, everybody. Keep writing.
Bye bye.